Welcome to Behavior Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Before we get started, we want to tell you about a special event we're hosting in Philadelphia on October 17th, 2019.
Behavioral Grooves is celebrating our 100th episode with a special live podcast from the Pennsylvania Academy for the Performing Arts, with doors opening at 6 p.m. and the event starting at 7 on October 17th, 2019. And we hope that you will be able to join us. Tickets for the special live podcast event are limited, but they also include free food and a free drink.
And since we have a hand in picking the food, we can tell you it's going to be great.
And that's not the only reason you should come.
Not by a long shot. You're going to put this on your calendar for two reasons. First, you'll want to hang out with other people who are fascinated by the application of behavioral science. Mm-hmm. And second, you'll want to attend so you can hear a live, in-person Behavioral Grooves discussion with Annie Duke. Annie is the best-selling author of Thinking in Bets, and she'll be on stage with a surprise guest that we've not yet announced.
Annie is one of our favorite guests and a favorite author of ours. Her book outlines an approach to decision-making that is invaluable for both personal and business context. She's funny, insightful, and wicked smart, and we are certain that you will take away a new technique to improve your decision-making if you come to this event. So you should definitely join us.
It would be awesome if you would join us in person, but if you can't, we're pleased to announce that Podbean is sponsoring our event, and they're going to make their new Podbean Live technology available.
Wow.
Podbean Live allows for streaming live events like this one so that listeners can get the full effect of the event while it's happening. We're very excited to have our very own podcast publisher, Podbean, promote the podcast public proceedings with passion.
All right. I didn't think you could pull that off. Try saying that 5 times fast, though.
I got through it one time, so let's just go with that.
Okay. So people, there are links in the show notes to more information on the event. But in addition to Podbean, we also have a gold sponsor in People Science.
Absolutely. They're terrific.
Yeah. And so they are bringing the behavioral science into the application of work and life and looking at why we do what we do. So, all right. More information can be found about both the event and our sponsors in the show notes.
Absolutely.
So please take a look down there. But right now, let's talk about this episode. We were lucky enough to meet our guest in a Minneapolis hotel while his husband was attending a medical conference at the University of Minnesota. We had a relaxed conversation, but got into some serious topics, like the impact that data science can have when it's combined with behavioral science.
Jim Guszcza is the chief data scientist at Deloitte Analytics. He's using behavioral science for good, as they say, to help people understand data so that they can make better decisions. Jim is a terrific storyteller, and he has a way of integrating a wide variety of disparate elements into the concepts that he's discussing. He's a really bright guy, and we love talking to him, so we think that you'll enjoy it too.
Jim also shared how he got into behavioral science by reading a review for Michael Lewis's book Moneyball, written by the Nobel laureate Richard Thaler. Now, if that isn't a great gateway drug into behavioral science, I don't know what else is.
That is a great way to get introduced. Absolutely.
Right. So sit back with your favorite listening beverage and enjoy our conversation with Jim Guszcza.
Jim Guszcza, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We are, just for our listeners' sake, just to let them know that the audio is very different because we are actually recording in a Marriott courtyard overlooking the University of Minnesota.
Yes.
Not as glamorous as it sounds, but yeah.
But it's wonderful. And so we are excited to be here. We're lucky to have you in town.
I'm lucky that you guys are interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is fantastic.
Yeah. So can we start with a little bit about what you do?
Sure.
Because it doesn't necessarily fit with Behavioral Grooves.
Right.
I mean, your job is not behavioral in nature.
It certainly didn't start that way. My title is U.S. Chief Data Scientist at Deloitte, so I'm a data science by training, but not really. I mean, I have a PhD in philosophy, and I started as an actuary. But I know it's a cliche, but I sort of morphed. But the reason I became an actuary is that in my ignorance, I assumed that actuarial science was what we now call data science. That term data science didn't exist back then.
Okay.
So just kind of like entering the field from outside, from like this kind of philosophy background, I just wanted to do something scientific in the business world. And I sort of intuited that this is like a very data-rich, kind of field. And really, a lot of people think that actuaries are the original data scientists. I'm one of them. In a way, data science goes back 250 years when data was first used to price insurance contracts. And so now that's being generalized. There's just data about all aspects of business and people's lives, which is one interesting connection with behavior, right? People talk about big data all the time. And big is usually defined as being like high volume, high velocity, high variety data. But a lot of times B stands for behavioral, because it's data about you. It's data about your actions. You paid this bill late. You like this thing on this social media content. You stopped watching this streaming, TV series midway through this episode, but you binge watched this other series. All this stuff tells us a lot about your behaviors that can be used to make predictions going forward, maybe in very different domains. And there's a lot of controversy about this. So that's one connection with behavior. But that's actually not how I first got interested in behavioral science. It was really, there's actually an interesting University of Minnesota connection with how I got interested in
Tell us about that, because we started to talk about that a little bit before, so I want to hear more.
So this is, all right, so I'd heard the names Kahneman and Tversky way back when I was in grad school in philosophy, but I never really investigated. I was doing philosophy of physics, so I just knew the names. I didn't really know much about what they were doing. So I was pretty ignorant, woefully ignorant, really. I first learned about this stuff when I read a review of Michael Lewis's book Moneyball.
Okay.
Written by, wait for it, Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein.
The review was written by Thaler and Sunstein.
Correct. Okay. I was kind of like procrastinating at work one day, but this is kind of productive procrastination. Surfing the web in the afternoon, having my coffee. And I just read Moneyball. I bought it, because I connected Moneyball with what I was doing as a data scientist, right? I was building algorithms to help underwriters at commercial insurance companies better select and price risks. And so I heard about Moneyball, which is about using data to help baseball scouts make better hiring decisions. I kind of like made this connection. There's an obvious analogy, right? But so that was nice as far as it went. But when I read Thaler and Sunstein's review of Moneyball, I just had this not minor, major epiphany that kind of changed the way I thought about my own career. It's like I'd been thinking I'd been thinking about our algorithms as being valuable because I was such a good data scientist, because the data was so powerful. And sure, that may be true, but what was really important and what I was sort of neglecting was that the reason our algorithms were so valuable is because the ways humans make decisions is so suboptimal in a lot of settings. And this is not saying that people are stupid or, a lot of times people criticize Kahneman saying that it's a very pessimistic view of human cognition. And I don't think that's fair. I think that it's fair to say that our brains evolved in a certain set of circumstances. They evolved to enable us to survive in the wild. They didn't necessarily evolve to help us make optimal decisions when we put on a suit and sit around a boardroom and make decisions, right?
Exactly.
So in the same way that I need eyeglasses because I'm myopic, right? So eyeglasses help me see better. And that's a human invention to help me extend my capabilities. Well, the predictive algorithms I build are kind of mental prostheses. They're eyeglasses for the mind that help insurance company underwriters, baseball scouts, hiring managers, judges, doctors make better decisions. All right. So that was the kind of insight I got by reading this Thaler and Sunstein review of Moneyball. They're asking, why could it possibly be the case that these highly paid professionals, these baseball scouts, whose sole job it was to make this certain kind of decision in a high-stakes field where a lot of money was at stake, these people are being paid high salaries, and it's data-rich, yet they would make these suboptimal decisions. How could that exist? And I think essentially what they said was that it takes discipline and practice and willpower to switch from simple intuitions to a careful assessment of evidence, and that's what was dramatized in the movie Moneyball.
Yeah,
right. It was like the
struggle.
Like Philip Seymour Hoffman's character was a real skeptic, and he's like saying, I know this is a good baseball player. And
I can tell. I see. I see it. I forget what that line was that he was talking about, but it's great.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's just it's kind of like an overconfidence bias. It's like, and it's your level of confidence in somebody is not a measure of statistical confidence, like we talk about in data science or statistics. It's more like a feeling, right? And Thaler and Sunstein talked about very specific heuristics, like the availability heuristic. Yeah. We assume when you ask about what is the frequency of English words that end in ing, you give that a higher frequency than words whose second last letter is n, that sort of thing, right? And so, like by analogy in insurance, if the last risk I underwrote had a certain kind of like frying machine in the kitchen, and there's a bad claim associated with it, that claim could have been partly bad luck. But I recall that episode very, very vividly, and the next time I see a similar risk, I might not want to write it, right? So it's like that's the reason why my algorithms were so economically, significant, right? That's the reason why they added so much value to companies. It wasn't just because the data was good and because I was a good data scientist. It's because we're giving people a tool they can use to make better decisions, to enforce a little bit more consistency.
Adding eyeglasses to the folks who had difficulty seeing.
No, that's exactly right. And so, yeah, I can't remember if it was the review or this got me reading, and I quickly learned that one of Kahneman's forefathers was a psychologist here in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota, named Paul Meehl, who back in the mid-'50s wrote this kind of classic book called, I think it was called Clinical versus Statistical Prediction. And he had kind of like this Moneyball epiphany way back in the 50s in his field, which is psychology. And he found, I think it was, and again, I'm not an expert, so this is from memory, so, caveat to all of your listeners, but I think the first thing he looked at was, who could, what would do better, what would be a better way to diagnose people for schizophrenia? A clinician using his or her clinical judgment based on a lot of training and a lot of graduate school. And
many years of work and interaction with lots of different people, all of that, right?
Exactly. Or, a 10-factor regression model or whatever it was. And, it turned out the regression model could outperform the clinician. And then he started testing this in a lot of different fields, like, which team's going to win the football game, right? There's a Vikings game today. Which wine has higher quality, is going to be a higher quality wine. Which patient is more likely to have this disease. And he said that in every single one of these studies that he surveyed, I think there are 20 or so studies, in each case, the algorithm did at least as well as the clinician. And in most cases, the algorithm outperformed the clinician. And so it's not that we want to replace the clinicians with the algorithms. It's just that in the same, no more than you want to replace my eyes with eyeglasses. That's just kind of like this silly misconception about artificial intelligence. But we just need this kind of help. And so that's when I sort of realized that this thing I was doing was going to explode. And this is going to take over all areas of business.
Wow.
And so it's just a very interesting,
That's a big leap. I'm just thinking about your ability to have that aha moment because of this information. I think is remarkable.
Well, it was Thaler and Sunstein. It's like that review of Moneyball is really what was the epiphany.
And
by the way,
I
later learned that Michael Lewis learned about this subject when he read Thaler's and Sunstein's review of his own book Moneyball. That's what he wrote in the Undoing Project. That review is kind of what set him thinking about this stuff, and that's how he knocked on Kahneman's door and
started that whole process.
Yeah.
Wow. And when was this?
Well, I read the review in 2004. The review is called "Who's on First." I think it was also published in the University of Chicago Law Review, but I read it in the New Republic.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a big epiphany for me.
Okay, so you have an academic background. Because you went through a doctoral program.
Yeah.
Do you think would you characterize yourself as someone who looks at the world through a scientific lens?
Yeah, I think I do. My PhD is in philosophy, and the specific subject was philosophy of physics and philosophy of science. So I always think about things through a scientific lens. I come at fields from outside. It's like I have double imposter syndrome, right? Because I'm a data scientist who does not have a PhD in statistics or computer science, right? It's a PhD in philosophy. And here I am like talking to you guys about behavioral science. Like, what the hell am I even doing here
You're
anyway?
doing great. There is enough meat in the sauce.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay. I think I'm a lousy cook. What can I say? But yeah, so I tend to think about things from like kind of first principles, and sometimes that makes me kind of slow. But other times it can kind of pay off because I might make connections that might not occur to me otherwise.
So in the world of business, I think that we're often missing that scientific mindset, right? I think we are in the just go do it mindset in business. Have you run into that? What kind of value do you think that scientific lens brings to the world of business? Because I think it's really important. Yeah,
that's a really good question. I don't know how articulate I can be, but my field is called data science, right?
Yeah.
And right now there's a lot of talk of this tagline called democratization of data science, which if you look at it in one way makes a lot of sense. But democratization of data science is basically saying, let's use kind of automatic AI machine learning tools to enable essentially novices to analyze big data and find patterns that we can find interesting. It's like you can you can take high school kids who are kind of prodigious, or not even prodigious, but just like kind of intellectually curious kids, give them these really powerful machine learning tools, and they can build algorithms that will classify cats. They can like label photographs saying this is a cat, this is a dog. Right. That's really, really impressive. And the idea of democratization of data science is that now we can take kind of people who've gotten their MBAs and kind of people with good domain knowledge and start having them do data science, even if they've just been to a kind of a Code Academy boot camp. And I actually think that that's kind of taking us in the wrong direction a little bit. I think it's very good to bring domain experts close to the process of analyzing data, but you don't want to lose sight of the fact that the operative word in data science is science, not data. It's a scientific method. So these tools are great if they enable the analyst to spend less time doing rote data scrubbing and data munging and kind of like pedestrian stuff, and more time actually thinking scientifically about where did the data come from, what am I trying to predict. Like what is our business goal, and can I translate this business goal into the design of some kind of an analytical project, and how can I bring data to bear? And if you do that in a kind of naive automatic machine learning way, like if you kind of outsource critical thinking to a computer, you might get things like algorithms that are biased against women. This gets us back to behavioral science, right? Like, from Moneyball, we know about Linda Babcock's and Iris Bonet's research, right? Yep. I mean, Moneyball, ironically, was a story just about hiring men. It was about baseball players. But we know that a lot of these heuristics that people use in the real world can be biased against females and minorities, right? And so if you can bring data science to bear properly, along the lines of Paul Meehl and Daniel Kahneman, Moneyball, Richard Thaler, we can use algorithms to ameliorate human biases. But if you just take big data, right, a lot data about previous hiring decisions and correlate, words on a resume.
Success with previous hiring decisions, you're never going to get past what that initial bias was.
Yeah, the implicit biases from human cognition are reflected in our decisions. Those decisions are encoded in data. If you use automatic machine learning and the democratized data science in a naive way to kind of extract patterns from that data, guess what, guys? You're going to build an algorithm that kind of encodes a lot of those human biases and can amplify them if you're very naive about it. So there's a famous story about how data scientists at a big company discover this. And to their credit, they audited their own algorithm. They realized this. They never used it. But that's maybe a small illustration of how you need not just data but science, and there's sort of an ethical component to it too.
Yeah, very much so. I think the technical term that you're searching for is garbage in, garbage out.
That's right. Thank you.
Is that right?
No, that's right. Well, that's GIGO, and there's also maybe BIBO, bias in, bias out.
Bias in, bias out.
I just made that up. I think that's a keeper.
I think it is a keeper. Absolutely. So, getting back to your work, so you become fascinated with the behavioral science side.
Completely.
How are you integrating it into your work at Deloitte?
So, early on, it was a kind of a talking point, to be honest with you. For many, between reading that Thaler-Sunstein review in 2004 till about, I'm a slow learner, but until maybe 2012 or so, God, it's a long time, I was mostly thinking about one of the three pillars of behavioral science, bounded rationality, biased rationality. Yep. And I was basically using it as like a talking point, as like a way of explaining why what we're doing works. And I would kind of say, guys, it's not just big data. It's that we're using the right data to overcome human biases, right? And I think that's an important distinction. So, but it's a bit philosophical. Sometimes it would make a difference. Like there was one time when I was building an algorithm to help child support enforcement officers do a more efficient job of reaching out to non-custodial parents who are at higher risk of going into arrears and falling behind on their payments. Okay. So that they could improve their jobs rather than just being reactive. They could actually proactively reach out to people and prevent the bad thing from happening. Great. And actually, I can come back to this when we get to nudge later on. But when I was actually at a very interesting child support conference for this, all the county level heads of child support enforcement in the state, and I gave them this kind of eyeglasses for the mind metaphor. And I could just see how they connected with that. Like, they're like, it just made it very clear that we're not doing this to replace you, and we're not doing this because there's something wrong with you. We're doing this because you're human, and there's nothing wrong with me because I wear eyeglasses, and there's nothing wrong with a professional using an algorithm to improve his or her professional judgment. And they're like, oh my God, this is great. I can actually use this to make my job more satisfying. I mean, and you can generalize this saying that you can use AI to humanize work more generally. It's something we can get back to later. So that's kind of the way I thought about this stuff for the first half of my career. More recently, it occurred to me that these other aspects of behavioral science, like we talked about bounded rationality, Thaler talks about the three bounds, right? There's also bounded self-control and bounded self-interest. Mm-hmm. it took me a bit longer, but I kind of connected that with data science.
How so? Give us an example of connecting confounded rationality to data science.
Sure, easily. And actually, I can give you an example outside of my own work. I can tell you how I came up with the idea. It was after Obama was reelected. I read 2 articles in the New York Times. I get all my ideas by reading these news articles, right? I read 2 articles in the New York Times in close succession. One was about how the Obama campaign used big data, but behavioral data really, to reach out to persuadable voters.
Right.
So they didn't reach out to voters who were definitely going to vote or just very highly likely to vote Democrat. Because why would you reach out to somebody who's almost certainly going to vote Democrat? You're wasting your time. Let sleeping dogs lie.
Wasting your money, wasting your time.
Yeah. What you want to do is reach out to people who you can make a difference with, like people who could be persuaded to vote Democrat or might intend to vote Democrat but might not get around to it, unless they're kind of given the right message. So that's an interesting kind of data science nuance right there. And again, another example of using science, thinking scientifically about the problem, not just using democratization of data science and pressing a button and just trying to naively make a prediction. You want to think about what are you trying to predict, not who's going to vote, but who can be persuaded to vote. That's a very interesting distinction.
And were messages tested then as well?
Well, this is where the behavioral science comes in. The other article was about how I think the New York Times called it a dream team of behavioral scientists informally advised the Obama campaign. I think Craig Fox was the leader of this coterie of data scientists. He's a behavioral scientist at UCLA, someone I think very highly of. And that got me thinking. So I remember one of the examples from the article I remember reading about was the use of commitment cards.
Okay.
So, are you going to vote for Obama? And you say yes. And I walk away feeling very satisfied, like I've done my job. Well, really, that would be a missed opportunity. I would be more effective if I asked you to sign a pre-commitment card.
Right. All right. Yes. All right. Well, why don't we sign this card?
Exactly.
And we'll get that. Again, using those behavioral science principles that we understand what actually drives behavior. Because that's the big thing. It's that goal intention versus implementation, actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that intention action gap, that's kind of metaphorical for the way I think about this stuff too. I think that organizations, they don't care about algorithmic outputs, they care about better outcomes, right? So in insurance, it's fine if I build a model that says that this risk is safer bet than that risk. But if you don't use that, if you don't make that decision, it's all for naught. Or if Paul De Podesta builds an algorithm for Moneyball and Philip Seymour Hoffman doesn't use it, again, you're not going that last mile. And by analogy, it's for these. So those are for thinking slow decisions. For an economic decision, you have to kind of take the algorithm and make the economically efficient decision. And there can be organizational biases to doing that, but you have to overcome that. But in these other applications, like voting behavior, the last mile problem, bridging the gap between like the algorithmic output and the better outcome, is human behavioral, right? In this case, it's the intention action gap. Or if I'm working for a health organization or a health insurance company, what if the algorithm flags me as being someone who might be at risk of developing a lifestyle-based disease like diabetes or obesity?
Yeah.
Again, you can't just give me information, like you should eat this way, you do this. That won't change my behavior.
G.I. Joe effect. Yeah. More knowledge isn't going to help you overcome it.
Exactly. So in a business setting, sure, knowledge, giving people more information when there are economic incentives at stake, that's a big piece of the puzzle. But when it comes to like human behavior, like purchasing behavior, voting behavior, health behavior, employee benefits behavior, public sector behavior, like the restaurant owner making sure his restaurant or her restaurant is clean, all these things, it's not enough just to build the algorithm. Or building the algorithm, I'd say, is maybe helpful or maybe sometimes necessary, but not sufficient. To really go that last mile, using behavioral nudge tactics to operationalize those algorithms can really add a lot of value to our algorithms. Yeah. So it's a little bit like the analogy I sometimes make is, the salad tastes better if you put the salad dressing on it, right? The data, the algorithms are the salad, but the dressing is like a small, maybe even a low-cost additive that just transforms the whole experience. Yeah. So that's the epiphany I had like circa 2013, 2014, that every organization that has a data science capability should also have a behavioral insights capability.
So how are you using that? So how are you using that new found insight to the work that you're doing?
Well, I'll give you one example. And this is kind of early. This is right around the time I was writing my first article about this. And it was an offshoot of our insurance work. So a colleague of mine, his name is Mike Green, one of my favorite colleagues, brilliant guy, got me on the phone and was talking about a project that we had just embarked upon for one of the U.S. states. It was New Mexico, and it was an insurance problem in the public sector, this unemployment insurance. And the goal was to kind of lessen improper unemployment insurance payments.
Okay.
The idea is that if you lose your job, you're supposed to kind of log on to a portal every week and certify that A, I'm looking for work, here's what I'm doing to find a new job, and B, here's how much money I collected last week by, maybe driving Uber or, landscape, whatever it is. Now, the more you report, the less you're going to collect from the state. So there's this kind of natural, temptation perhaps to underreport your income. So the state asked us to build an algorithm to use whatever data we could, maybe demographic data, maybe web click data, to predict who's most likely to be collecting benefits improperly. And so we were on a call brainstorming different machine learning approaches to come up with a predictive classifier that's as accurate as possible, right? Natural thing to do. And here's an example where the behavioral economics comes in. It started with this kind of technical observation, which is that anytime you're going to build a classifier like this, there are going to be a lot of false positives.
Right.
If the overall, and actually this relates to a cognitive bias. It's called base rate neglect. This is not intuitive to people. If the overall base rate is low, even if you have a very powerful classifier that might be 95% accurate and the overall base rate is 5%, the probability, like think of your doctor, right? Your disease, your diagnostic algorithm is 95% accurate. The disease has like a 95% base rate for the kind of person that you're treating right now. The person tests positive for the disease. You ask the doctor, what is the probability that this patient has the disease? The doctor might say 95%.
Yeah.
No, the answer is more like 17%.
Yeah.
And that's a Bayesian posterior probability. By analogy here with unemployment insurance, right? If we build this algorithm, the highest scoring, the most risky people flagged by the algorithm, more often than not are going to be collecting benefits properly, not improperly. So this is the last mile problem. If we use this algorithm to shut off benefits, we're going to be doing the wrong thing most of the time. And our algorithm, which is a good algorithm, could be what Cathy O'Neill might call a weapon of math destruction.
Yeah.
Right? So what I suggested is it's not just in building the algorithm, it's in what do you do with it, right? So these are not always thinking slow decisions, they can be thinking fast decisions. So rather than use the algorithm to selectively shut off benefits, let's use the algorithm as a nudge engine. And hypothetically, say you've been collecting benefits for 4 or 5 weeks and you've been logging on every, Tuesday morning, 9 o'clock, saying I made $100 last week and then $150 last week. Maybe in week 5 or 6 you log on Saturday instead of Tuesday. And this time you're not reporting $100, you're reporting $150. Or you say you're reporting maybe $650 instead of $150. That might take you into a higher risk category. If then you see a message for the first time saying, did you know that 9 out of 10 of your neighbors report their earnings properly? It might just get you to introspect a little bit.
Yeah.
So we actually use Robert Cialdini's, kind of social norm nudge messages.
Since we are in a hotel room, we could think about the Cialdini study on reusing towels.
That's exactly right. It's the same principle. I mean, it's like most of the people in this room in this hotel, right, reuse their towel, and of course it's also what the UK Behavioral Insights team used to get taxpayers to pay their taxes on time. So I would argue that this is what we would today call an example of ethical AI.
Right.
It would be unethical AI. So, an implication of this is that when you're thinking about algorithms and talking about ethical AI, we talked about biased algorithms earlier. So that gets a lot of attention as well as should. But I think what's neglected is it's not just the algorithms that can be biased, also what you do with it has a moral component to it too. So how do you act on these algorithms? And so very often, nudge can be a very... you can generalize from this, but I think nudge gives you a new set of tools that make it more likely that you're going to be able to find kind of pro-social, pro-person uses of these kinds of algorithms.
So I want to extrapolate out on
Sure.
that because I think it's really interesting because you actually brought up the Obama team using some of that early data science in the 2012 election, right?
Yeah.
And getting those potential Democratic voters that are on the fence to actually do that.
Either on the fence, or maybe they just they just get stressed out on Tuesday morning. They just forget to do it, or they space out. Exactly.
Move out to 2016.
Yeah.
And bring Cambridge Analytica into the fold.
Never heard of it. I'm kidding.
Well, if you haven't, let me tell you. And again, there's this component of Cambridge Analytica that is going in
Right.
having insight into
Yep.
some personality components that supposedly, based upon your Facebook likes and dislikes,
That's right.
gets a big five personality profile of you down to understanding what is your most biggest fear
Yep.
and various different things, and then using that in an election cycle to message different participants.
That's right.
Is there a difference in your mind between those two? Because
Yes.
you hear,
Yep.
and let me hear your conversation here.
I think it's a brilliant question. By the way, I wrote an article about this actually with my husband Shantanu, who's here at the university today, 6 years ago. And in that article, it was about pro-social uses of big data, and this is behavioral big data, right? And we actually cited at the time this little-known study coming out of the Cambridge University Psychometrics Lab about how they analyzed a sample of 58,000 Americans. And they had ground truth data about, are they Democrat or Republican, are they gay or straight, are they Christian or Muslim, what are the big five personality traits? And they said we can predict many of these things with 80 or 90% area under the curve accuracy using Facebook likes. Yeah. And it's sort of like a cautionary tale about how this data can go. I think, to me, the implication of just, kind of cutting to the chase, I think the implication of this is that a lot of the ethical discussions surrounding nudge, Sunstein has written about the ethics of influence. Thaler talks about what does nudging for good mean as opposed to nudging for evil?
Yeah, sludge versus nudge.
Sludge versus nudge, exactly. That's Don Moynihan, right?
Yep.
He has that new book on administrative burden. He's going to speak at our Nudgeapalooza I believe, in December at Georgetown University. You heard it here first. You guys should come and record that.
Oh, we would, yeah.
Let's do that.
Yes, let's definitely do that.
It's a date. Okay, anyway, Georgetown, December 9th. I think that a lot of the discussion around the ethics of influence and the ethics of nudging and what does nudging for good mean, a lot of that should port onto these new discussions about AI ethics, right? Because a lot of AI is based on behavioral data. And think about what we were saying earlier about how you can use algorithms to extend people's capability.
Yes.
Eyeglasses for the mind, right? So I can use algorithms to give people information they can use to make better decisions and be smarter, more effective professionals. That's better thinking slow through algorithms, like better living through chemistry, right? Better living through data science, better decisions through data science.
You have every corporate tagline right there.
Well, exactly.
Better living through pharmaceuticals.
It's like a symphony of taglines. I love it. So I think the implication of this last mile idea is that we can also use algorithms together with behavioral insights to help people make better thinking, fast decisions, right? So maybe we can use algorithms in digital environments to help people nudge people to walk more. So we're doing a pilot study right now with the Penn Medicine Nudge Unit, where we're trying to use behavioral data collected through wearables to kind of get a sense of people's behavioral phenotypes, and maybe we can figure out which kind of nudge is most effective for which kind of person to prompt them to walk more. Kind of on analogy with precision medicine, maybe there's a precision nudging concept we could do. Now, that's speculative. Who knows if that exact idea will work, but it's an example of how we can use data together with nudges to help people achieve their goals.
Well, sorry to interrupt you, but Tim and I actually just grooved on this just yesterday, because we were talking about the next iteration, I think, in any behavioral change design component is this element of making sure that intervention, that you are at that part where it is at that moment when you need it. And we talked about, this taking a pill.
Right.
I could get a nudge to take a pill at 8 o'clock every night. That's great. But what if I'm out at dinner at 8 o'clock at night and I get the text message
and you don't have the pill with you?
I don't have a pill with me. So how can we use these things? And so what I'm hearing you say is this precision nudging is that component. So I'm glad to hear that there are people doing that. And I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I think it's exactly right. I mean, like the Nudgeapalooza a couple years ago, I think it was Wendy Wood. She just uttered this phrase, nudge 2.0. Or a lot of people are talking about digital nudges. Shlomo Benartzi has this book called The Smartest Screen. I just think that nudging in digital environments that are data rich, I call it the 3 Ds: data, digital, design. And design is in the sense of human-centered design. And you guys probably know this, right? The book Nudge was inspired by Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things. So nudge is like I don't like the libertarian paternalism tagline so much. It doesn't really, I don't really grok on that. But I call it Don Norman-esque. Human-centered design for choice environments. So just to kind of summarize, I mean, it's like we can, it's better decisions through data, right? Mm-hmm. Both in a thinking slow sense and a thinking fast sense. Either way, you can use data together with, good explainable AI or good choice architecture to help people make either better deliberate decisions or better automatic decisions. But there's a potential dark side. Like any technology can be used to help us or hurt us.
Right.
So we can use this stuff to extend our capabilities. Like at MIT Media Lab, they like to say extended intelligence instead of artificial intelligence, and I completely agree.
I love
with
that. I love that term. I know. I'm a big fan of that as well.
I am too. I interviewed Tom Malone from MIT Sloan last fall with my colleague Jeff Schwartz, and he talks about human-computer collective intelligence. That's why I like to think about this. It's like we have smart teams of humans and computers working together. We can use computers to extend our capabilities. But I think that example you gave earlier about using social media likes to make predictions that are then used to kind of determine interventions or messages that might kind of prey on my fears or on my prejudices, is that extending my capabilities, or is that manipulating me for someone else's end?
Yeah.
Right, so that's the dark side, and unless there's another, I think all these things relate. There's another tagline that comes up a lot in AI these days called XAI or explainable AI.
Okay.
The idea is that if a judge is using an algorithm to make a parole decision, or if a doctor is using an algorithm to make a medical diagnosis, the doctor or the judge needs more than just the number 42. You need an explanation of why. You need a notion of how confident the algorithm is and why is it saying what it's saying, so that I can make an informed decision about should I listen to this algorithm, should I ignore it, should I complement it with some other insights that I might have because I have human common sense and contextual awearness. And so you want to. So I always say in the same way that nudge is about human-centered design for choice environments, AI needs human-centered design. We're trying to create tools that people can use to make better decisions. And so, I'm making this analogy in the same way that we can nudge for evil using data to manipulate people. You can also unwittingly create AI that short circuits our thinking slow decisions too. And I think so.
Right.
So,
right.
So human-centered design is part of it. And I think implicit, like when a lot of people are saying human-centered design, they're saying implicitly we're saying in an ethical way. And so, now this is the one philosophical thing I'll say, right? This is the one thing I learned in grad school. I took Kant's Ethics from Chris Korsgaard, who's now at Harvard, and she was a John Rawls student. But it's the Kantian categorical imperative, right? It's like you want to treat people as ends in themselves, not as means to your end. So if I'm a tech startup, and I'm creating a wearable app that's digital, that's data rich and infused with behavioral design to help my customers achieve their goals of walking more and being healthier, I would call that ethical AI, because I am helping people achieve their own goals as stated by them. But if I'm another company that's trying to use advertising to manipulate people in ways that they would not choose if they had unlimited self-control and unlimited rationality, then I'm using AI and data to prey upon human frailties rather than using AI to extend people's capabilities. And I think this is consistent with the way Thaler and Sunstein talk about the ethics of nudge.
Yes.
They're saying it's good, nudging for good. And again, if I'm wrong, then please correct me. But nudging for good means we're helping people make the decisions they would make if they had unlimited control and unlimited rationality.
That's the foundation.
Yeah, that's the foundation. Now, I think this is where it gets. This is, I think, in my mind, where it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Because there's the definite evil component out here, right?
Yeah.
Where you could say, oh, they're grabbing this information and they're using it in such a way that you're manipulating, the end user. And then there's the definite good, as you mentioned, in wearables and helping them achieve their self-set goals. Mm-hmm. What happens though when you're using this component in it might be murkier? And Tim and I had a conversation a long time ago now with a group. I can't remember even the company, but they were using AI to look at temperatures inside of San Francisco
in microclimates.
Mm-hmm. Pairing that with some data they have about the individual, and then sending messages about buying beer. Because
there's a high correlation between the temperature and when someone is apt to go out and buy beer. And
different people have different temperature ranges, and so outside of just being creepy, right, this component of that my GPS, you're located in this area of town, and now it's 82 degrees there. You get a message of you can go to the store down the street and buy Coors Light, and get a 10% discount on it.
Well, and you could argue that if I'm going to go buy beer anyway, then maybe this is okay.
Right.
But it still feels incredibly creepy to me to think about we're going to nudge you at the point in time that the temperature hits the right place for me.
That's right.
And boom, that's now I'm going to get the nudge.
Yeah. So Tim might be 82 degrees, I might be 78 degrees. You know, so. I don't know. Those are those gray areas where I think this gets to be such a...
There is a moralism to ultimately underlying all of this.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because good and bad are still relative terms.
Well, a lot of times there are a lot of cases where they just involve kind of inherent trade-offs, and they involve things where like different reasonable people might come to different conclusions, and so and that's what you guys are saying, right? They're saying they're gray areas. So I don't know if I have a fixed opinion about this exact case. I would need to think about it a little bit more, but in general, again, like I think this is like a kind of channeling the Kantian idea is that you want to kind of like. When you're thinking through, like if I'm a startup company, this is my business model, right? I'm not talking about this specific one, but just more generally. Do I want to live in a world, that's just completely infused with this kind of technology and this kind of marketing, where where all this data is being used to make these precision, predictions, and kind of influencing me in ways that I'm not really opting into, and that I'm not really privy to? Is that really the kind of world I want to live in? So this idea is kind of like generalizing your action to like, well, what if everybody did it?
Yeah.
Does that result in the kind of world we want to live in? And if the answer is no, that might be again, we're talking about heuristics. That might be a useful, kind of like ethical heuristic for deciding.
Think about this. If this then gets extrapolated out to the vast majority of things, is this something that I would like for me?
Exactly.
Even in that perspective. Was it Minority Report that had the movie where, the advertisements changed as you walk by.
That's right.
And all of those various different things.
That's right.
That was supposedly a dystopian kind of future perspective. Do we want that? Is that what we really want?
That's not a dystopian future. That's a business model. What are you talking about?
That is a business model. I want to go back to your 3Ds, data, digital, and design.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those? Because I'm not sure if I easily can separate out what those are standing for.
Yeah, the idea was that I'll give you another example of data and digital. Like data is like my earliest example as a data scientist was I told you guys before I started recording, I built a credit scoring algorithm for a big insurance company, and I discovered, and again, this is like early days of behavioral data, but it's kind of, I've been thinking about this for 20 years now. I started when I was 12, by the way.
I was going to say 8.
You don't look a day over 26.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, let's turn the lights on now. But what I saw firsthand was that your personal credit score is a stronger predictor of who's likely to crash their car, have a homeowner's claim, than a lot of traditional actuarial rating elements. Big time. So just think about data. A lot of data is behavioral data. We can use this data to make surprisingly strong prediction in a lot of domains, right? You just gave the example of using it to influence elections. My earliest example is building a credit scoring model for a big insurance company, and I saw that behavioral data, namely a credit score, is much more predictive of who's going to crash their car than a lot of traditional rating elements. So I've been thinking about data for a long time. Fast forward to today, the analog of credit scoring data is telematics data. People's cars are connected to the internet. You are part of the Internet of Things when you're driving now. And so insurance companies can know a lot of fine-grained details about your driving behavior that can be used to make ever more fine-grained actuarial predictions and segmentations, which may be fine, right? That's the kind of traditional business model of insurance, and that's the way insurance works, and maybe that's okay. But that's D. That's the first D in the 3Ds, right? There's also digital. Digital is what's making all this possible, right? We have this digital revolution, right? It's one of the biggest. It's changing everything about our business world and our personal lives. Everything we do is digitally mediated now. So that's why this insurance company can. So credit score is maybe the earliest example of this digital revolution, where ordinary quotidian day-to-day behaviors leave behind digital breadcrumbs, and you can use those digital breadcrumbs to make surprisingly strong predictions. It took the insurance industry 40 years to figure out that these digital breadcrumbs about your bill-paying behavior are also very predictive of who's going to crash their car. That's a canary in the coal mine example of what's now ubiquitous, right? Because we're digitally connected. We leave behind these digital breadcrumbs that can be used in all these ways, and we just talked about that can be used in ethically dubious ways. The third D is design, and I'm going back.
I want to interrupt
please.
you because because digital breadcrumbs still sounds like data.
It is. Yeah, I'm just talking about a specific kind of data. So instead of data, being cast off by, like an RFID tag, from a machine part. So you can use data about machine parts to predict when a part is going to fail. That's like one kind of big data. All I'm saying is that a lot of this big data that organizations use is really data about people. It comes from people.
It's behaviorally based.
Yeah, it's behavioral data.
It has a digital component because we're so wired in today's. My understanding of this is that you could have a record of car crashes, right, which could be done through paper, and you have your car track history, but now you have telemetrics that says, hey, you brake hard. And that's all digital information. Am I talking about this right? And so you're getting that digital information beyond just the actual behavior that we're actually doing.
So and that's the implication of the social media like stuff before too. Like these things that we just do in day-to-day life. They're much stronger predictors of our future behavior than traditional demographic traits. Like what demographic box you're in, or what you say on surveys.
Yeah.
So I think one of the people who started talking about digital breadcrumbs early on was a guy named Sandy Pentland at MIT Media Lab. So I'm kind of using his tagline, digital breadcrumbs. But when I first heard him say it, it's completely reflected my own experience doing this stuff in the insurance industry and other places too. I mean, when I built my credit scoring model for an insurance company, it occurred to me, wow, I bet if this insurance company had, supermarket club card data, we could use that club card data about people's shopping behaviors to predict are they likely to crash their car, because it's behavioral. If you're a 16-year-old male motorcycle driver, that's demographic, well, you get a high price for insurance, right? But if we know from your shopping behavior that you're a 16-year-old male motorcycle driver who reads Martha Stewart Living magazine and only eats vegan organic produce, you're probably a safe bet, right? Because you're very deliberate. And we could use that to adversely select against our competitors. Yeah. So that's data in digital, right? It's like it's data, but it's coming through these digital media, and because it's this kind of like it's data about people's behaviors. It's just their automatic behaviors that digital media are capturing. We can make all these predictions that we couldn't make a few years ago.
Yeah.
So for me, the missing link that maybe is the missing link that enables ethical AI is this idea of design, human-centered design. And one aspect of human-centered design is explainable AI. It's like we need to take into account human psychology. We can't just tell people, here's the number. You need to explain why. You need to kind of take into account human needs when you give them that algorithmic output. But in a thinking fast setting, think about going back to this insurance company example. They're capturing all this data about my driving. If we take behavioral design into account, we could use Robert Cialdini's psychology influence again to give something back to the people who generated the data. Rather than just using the data to kind of like determine their riskiness, we can actually give them information back about their riskiness. We can both inform them, but also nudge them to be safer drivers through digital media.
Your driving is at 60% of everybody else driving on the road. Here are some hints on how to get it up to 80%.
That's right.
Different things. Yeah, no, you could have those types of interventions.
That's exactly right. So then that would be inherently pro-social. The insurance company would have more customer touch points, so it's more customer-centric. It'd be good for the driver because you're actually helping the driver achieve his or her goals, which is to kind of get around safely. And it's good for society. You could lower these three things, data, digital, design, I think can motivate new business models and new types of products that are inherently ethical.
Which is the new wine in a new bottle rather than new wine in an old bottle.
You got it. That's exactly right. Yeah. So I just think that this 3D tagline, to me, it's like a helpful tagline for kind of thinking through these things. There's a new book called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. I admit I have not read the book. It's like 800 pages long, I think. I want to read it, but I haven't had time to read it yet. I have bounded self-control, okay, and bounded rationality. So I'm human with a capital H like everybody else, and I really do want to read it, but I've been thinking along the lines, I believe, of what she's been writing about, and I think that if you sort of like pour the new wine into old bottles, you get maybe you get business models and maybe models of capitalism that might not be sustainable in the long run. But if you kind of think about human needs, which is essentially what Nudge is all about, thinking about human needs and human capabilities and how can we help people overcome their natural frailties. you're more likely to get ethical AI out of it.
Is this an edit part? Is this what this is?
Is this too abstract, guys? I mean,
No, this is not too abstract at all in my mind. I think this has been fascinating to me.
Sure?
I think because there's some real interesting components here, and the data digital design lends itself into this whole component of thinking about where are we going in the future, right? So we can take this into the future, and I think there'll be many businesses that would probably take this and put that new wine into that old bottle, and it might get a new, like, hey, here's this splash, but as you said, it's not sustainable. And I think then there's others who are going to be thinking about this in a whole new way.
Yeah.
And when you think about it in that whole new way, we have to take this new world into consideration. It's kind of this component of, you know what, the solutions of the past, and this is corny, right? The solutions of the past aren't going to solve the issues of the future. And, I think about automation. I think about, the component of how many people have lost their jobs because of automation, and that's uncorked. It's not going to stop. We're not going to be able to say, go back in time and say, let's fill these plants back up with human workers instead of these robots.
Exactly.
And,
that's not going to happen.
And you look and you extrapolate that out in the future, and you look at trucking, and you look at retail, and you look at accounting. You look at some of these things that, you already look at, people go, oh, well, it's only the manufacturing jobs. No. What's the tax, TurboTax or whatever, where, hey, you just enter, the computer does it all for you.
Yes.
We're going to lose so many jobs that way, and people, aren't going to be retrained into doing, all those things. We have to think of a new way to answer that question.
That's a great point. I completely agree with you, and I think it's very analogous. It's almost a different aspect of the same conversation. If we just kind of think in terms of the way we've always been doing things, we're going to lose. We're going to do things that kind of like hurt the overall population, but also we're going to miss a lot of opportunities. Yeah. Like a very simple example, which I've thought about, and my colleague at Deloitte, John Hagel, has also used this as an example recently, is thinking about call center operators. Yeah. So like a very straightforward type of AI is chatbots, right? Yeah. And you can imagine, oh, great, if you're a business owner, like we can get rid of all of our call center operators, just replace them with chatbots. Yeah. Now, is that really customer-centric? Is that really employee-centric? No. And it kind of gets to going back to the AI theme, it gets back to what I believe is a misperception about AI. Again, like, just think about the simple example of, Paul Meehl here at University of Minnesota discovering a simple regression model can outperform a clinician. We're not saying we want to replace the clinician with a regression model. Right. Think, generalizing from that, there are two different types of intelligence going on. There's one narrow type of intelligence, which is the algorithm. Intelligence is just the ability to achieve a goal. Here, the goal is to make a diagnosis, right? The algorithm, can achieve very simple goals, like maybe it can automate simple diagnoses. Yep. But that goal is better achieved by the human working with the algorithm. This kind of idea of an extended intelligence or a human-computer collective intelligence. So, so the general principle is that, algorithms are good at some things, humans are good at others, but they're complementary forms of intelligence. Right. They have complementary capabilities. So yeah, chatbots can absolutely handle simple calls. And like if I call into, an airline saying, hey, is my flight on time? Yes, your flight is on time, automated. That's great. That pleases me. It's faster than a human could do. Right. But what you should do is use that to free up the humans to use common sense and humor and empathy and spending more time.
And not saying, humans, you have 15 seconds to get this person onto the, off the call. Right. No, now you have that ability to be a human with another human. Right. And let's spend the amount of time necessary, and you're not being ranked and rated on, I got through 34 calls in this past hour.
That's right. No, that's exactly it. So it gets me on kind of Taylorist command and control workplaces. So it's a more human-centered form of management, but it's also a more customer-centric form because you're creating new value for customers. Yeah. And I think it maps onto, going back to Paul Meehl's domain of medical science, right? Same thing with doctors. You don't want to use algorithms to replace doctors. And there have been recent prominent examples of AI researchers saying we shouldn't train oncologists anymore because deep learning algorithms can do a better job of flagging cancerous tumors in X-rays. But I think Eric Topol has a new book. Again, it's on my list. I'm going to read it, I promise. But he's basically saying AI can give doctors the gift of more time with patients. So it's kind of going to what you're saying about how if we use creativity and really think about what human needs are, think about the nature of these algorithms and how they can complement us rather than short-circuit us.
And think about the nature of the work. And think about how do we as humans want to interact with others, both from an employee perspective and B, a customer perspective.
Right.
And you can create, I'm not saying a utopian world, but you can definitely get out of that Taylor kind of, how many widgets am I producing today as my only measure of success.
Why is it so hard to convince business leaders to make those steps, to go in that direction?
I think a lot of times, again, it's a lot of this is peer effects. So a lot of this is going back to Cialdini. I mean, if everybody is talking in terms of using AI to replace workers, you're just not thinking along these lines. And the person who says something, Cass Sunstein a few years ago wrote a book on groupthink. And if everybody is kind of saying one thing and you have a different thought, you sort of self-censor that because you're like, well, they must know something I don't know, or I'll just sound like a weirdo if I say this kind of thing. And so it's kind of hard to overcome those kinds of things. It's like, that's why there are kind of, fads in businesses, I think, too. But also, there's this new group at Stanford called the Stanford Humancentered AI Initiative. Okay. And I think one of the points they make, I've been thinking about human-centered AI in recent years too, as you can kind of tell, right? Like we need to kind of bring human needs and we need to kind of start with human behavior and build AI around that rather than say build AI and hope that humans conform, right? That's the basic idea. But like one of the points these Stanford Human-Centered AI people make, it's called Stanford High, is we need to bring more diversity into the AI field. So this is more of a specific thing that what you're talking about, but we don't want to just have computer scientists. We also
diverse
want
people. Define diversity, please.
Good question. Yeah, I think people with more diverse backgrounds, people from different kinds of walks of life, maybe, but also people trained in different fields too. So I'm hoping that what's coming out of this conversation is that behavioral scientists have a role to play in developing AI technologies.
Well, this is exactly Carnegie Mellon with their social and decision sciences group. That department is mathematicians, astrophysicists, economists, psychologists, all of them in the same group solving problems together.
Count me as a fan. No, I think that's exactly what we need. And so I think that a lot of these kind of like maybe less than desirable business models come from kind of monocultures of thinking. And I think if we've got people with different scientific perspectives, different disciplinary perspectives, but also just different backgrounds, we're more likely to get sustainable technologies.
All right. Yeah, diversity is such an important part of all of our growth. Yeah. Right. I mean, and historically, I just think about how tribes got stronger when they brought people from other tribes in.
That's right.
So we have a rich history in doing well with having diverse skills and a bunch of things, and yet there is such a tendency to resist it as well.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Did you want to go to music?
I'd love to.
I can tell by your body. You're going to music whether I like it or not. There you go.
There is enough meat in the sauce. I'm just going to just say that again. So let's talk a little bit about music. You would prefer to listen to music that was recorded or happened before the 1970s, before the 1980s, before the 1990s.
I'm kind of a man out of time. What can I say? Yeah.
You and Tim can have a whole conversation because you're both in the same boat. There you go.
But where I tend to cling to or am drawn to music that was written in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Yeah. You go back further with classical music. Tell us about some of your interests in classical music.
I like a lot of that stuff too. By the way, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. I like Van Morrison. None of this makes any sense. I mean, I'm a gay guy and I'm not old enough to remember those guys, but I'm just a fan of that kind of music. Leonard Cohen. I just like all this kind of stuff. It doesn't make any sense. Again, I'm like the 16-year-old male motorcycle driver who
is a vegan and
it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I mean, I grew up with music in the 80s and I was kind of like appalled by it. I look back on it now and it's kind of kitschy and kind of fun, but at the time I was just like revolted by it. And I'd wish I'd been born to live through the 60s. But
wow, there's something very simpatico about that.
We're grooving.
I love that.
We're grooving.
We are grooving.
But I also love classical and jazz music. I was lucky enough to go to a liberal arts school, and one of my best friends in college, David McDonald, who's a composer at Manhattan School of Music, he introduced me to early 20th century avant-garde music like Schoenberg, Berg, Webern from the Second Viennese School. So I love lots of classical music, especially chamber music. My idea of a perfect musical day is going to sound kind of weird, but I lived in London for a year, and I love going to Wigmore Hall, which is one of the best places in the world to hear chamber music. And whenever I'm in town, I try to go to their Sunday morning concerts, and just like hearing a Dvorak string quartet or a Schumann string quartet or something on a Sunday morning at Wigmore Hall is my ideal musical moment. Maybe that evening hearing Vijay Iyer play at a jazz club, that would be for me a perfect musical day.
So why do you think you like the smaller the quartets, the chamber music settings, smaller bands rather than the big classical full scale orchestras?
I have no idea, and I'm just going to speculate. I read a book by Susan Cain a few years ago called Quiet, and it's about introversion.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a popular book about introversion, and kind of a dim memory, but I think she sort of like reframed introversion towards this idea of the HSP, the highly sensitive person.
Yeah.
I think he cited research. I'm forgetting the name of the psychologist she cited. But highly sensitive people are, in particular, very sensitive to sound. And, introverts very often have a hard time navigating social situations where there's a lot of background noise. It's just very hard to process out other conversations and focus on one person. I feel that a lot. Maybe there's something about that with me too, where I can more easily embrace kind of smaller scale musical events rather than huge bombastic symphonies or huge rock concerts. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just tend to gravitate more towards like small jazz ensembles, chamber orchestras, small venues, that kind of stuff. More intimate types of music, folk music as opposed to very bombastic electronic music. I don't know.
So folk music, yes. EDM, no.
Not really.
Not
Yeah, not my thing.
No.
It's like so. It's more. I guess it's a personality thing that kind of trumps my demographics. Maybe I should like house music, but I never did.
That's okay. You also mentioned Schoenberg.
Yeah.
This which I tend to associate with kind of darker musical themes.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know if I don't think of it in terms of being dark. I just think of it in terms of being very interesting and austere.
Yeah, austere.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the other thing is that like Walt Whitman, right? I contain multitudes. Like I wouldn't want to listen to Schoenberg on a bright summer morning in Minnesota. Right. Like actually, when I was in Pittsburgh a few weeks ago, Deloitte sponsored a class that Linda Babcock was leading for their new behavioral science major at Carnegie Mellon. I was staying with friends in Pittsburgh, and I was streaming the Wonder Boys soundtrack. And it was just kind of like, I just loved almost every single song on the Wonder Boys soundtrack, and it just captured Pittsburgh for me because the movie Wonder Boys was filmed in Pittsburgh. And so I was just having this kind of like, kind of Proustian moment thinking about, that movie and just kind of like grooving on Pittsburgh. So I was streaming that as I was walking down the streets in Pittsburgh. So it's kind of like, I will listen to Schoenberg, but maybe at a certain place and time. Maybe like on a...
There's context.
Yeah,
context matters.
Like on a moody fall night, walking around some town in the Northeast, maybe I'll listen to Schoenberg. But on a bright summer day or a spring day in Pittsburgh, I'll listen to the Wonder Boys soundtrack. It's all context.
That's good. Could you leave us with 3 tips for someone who is interested in getting deeper into the application of behavioral science in whatever field they're working in, whether it's data science or whatever? What would you say to a listener that you could say, okay, here's 3 things that you could do, you could read, you could pursue?
Well, listen to this podcast for one. This is terrific. I've listened to a lot of your prior episodes. I think they're terrific. But I think that's the point. It's like this stuff has been popularized. I think the reason why Kahneman wrote Thinking Fast and Slow was to change the way people talk about things.
Yeah.
So that people are less likely to pour, new wine into old bottles, right? Reading books like Thinking Fast and Slow, Misbehaving is just extremely entertaining. Nudge, all these books I think are really, really helpful. Listen to podcasts. I think kind of like using common sense, thinking about your own work and, trying to like learn about these principles and think, how can it change the way I do things? So like if I'm a data scientist, maybe I can use this to, create more pro-social, human-centric AI. If I'm an HR person, maybe I can use behavioral economics principles to rethink our management tactics, away from
hiring, how we hire, various different pieces.
Hiring, or think about administrative burden. Like how much of HR is tied up with paperwork, right? And it's like if you actually think in terms of behavioral science, just don't get bogged down in the details. Just think at the high level. Oh wait, this is what we've learned about human nature. How does that change the way I should do my work, right? So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's just
No, that's great.
That's my journey. Yeah.
No, I think that's fantastic. Thank you. This has been highly, highly informative. And, fun.
Thank you. I enjoy this. I should come to Minneapolis more often.
You should, Jim. You should definitely come to Minneapolis more often. We could do this again. But thank you so much. We appreciate you being on the show.
You bet. My pleasure.
Yeah, let's groove.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavior Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our eyeglass-wearing minds. Wow.
I love that because Jim brought that up in such a cool way. This whole idea that, of course, we would get eyeglasses for our eyes because our vision isn't perfect. So why not fix our minds with algorithms? It's a really simple model and a really compelling idea.
Yeah, if we are not making the best decisions and we have a tool that helps us make those better decisions, why not use it? Right?
Yeah, which guests like Annie Duke, are trying to help people make better decisions with thinking in bets. This idea of here's some tools to help you make better decisions because you're just like your eyes, they're fatigued. They have biases. There's problems. There's, troubles.
My eyes have biases?
Well, but, emotional biases. Oh, I guess that would just be cognitive.
Exactly what you're saying. And there's something really nice about that easy to understand metaphor.
But there's I have trouble with it also.
Okay.
I'm concerned that it's saying that we could. The behavioral science would be the same as eyeglasses in terms of how we get there. And that's not how it works. Like if my eyes are bad, I go to the eye doctor and I say, hey, I think I need glasses. I'm having trouble reading. And the doctor says, oh, well, let's try and prescribe something. But I don't go to, when I'm trying to sign up for insurance, and see 20 options and I'm overwhelmed, I don't say, can somebody just give me an algorithm to make this easier? The nudges that are created, that are put into the behavioral science to help people make decisions are often unconscious. And so I think that there's a difference between this voluntary side of I need eyeglasses and a cognitive awareness of I need eyeglasses, and so I'm going to go get them to help repair me, versus the nudge that is happening on a subconscious level, even though, libertarian paternalism included here, we get to make our own decisions, but we know that nudges are extremely powerful and potent in the way that they impact us.
Yeah, so choice architecture, nudges, all of those factors impact the decisions we make much more than we realize. And so what I think I hear you're saying is eyeglasses are something that we choose to get or not get, and we make that from a very conscious decision. These eyeglasses for the mind, sometimes these nudges that are put in place are done by behavioral scientists or other people. And yes, we still have a choice given how nudges are typically used.
We do.
But they're not necessarily something that we have a conscious, that we understand that the nudge is in place, that we are aware that we are being, that we're having these eyeglasses put on us to help us make these decisions. And we may not want those eyeglasses. We may want to have the full variety of various different things,
or live our life in a cocoon and not being aware of all the true options that are out there.
And you can say that, but again, this goes back into the whole thing about like, oh, choice architecture is bad because you're leading people down the road. And it's like, no, choice architecture is just saying, look, the way that we structure the choice is we understand how it will typically end up. But you still, regardless of if you put it in there purposely or not, you're still doing choice architecture.
Yeah.
There is always going to be, if you have to choose between A and B, if you put A first and B second, that has an impact. If you put B first and A second, that has an impact, right? If one is pre-checked and one is not pre-checked, those have impacts. And doing that purposefully and doing it ethically is something I think that's important.
And ethics has been a theme for many, many episodes for us. We absolutely adhere to supporting ethical use of all these things. I think about our conversation with Bob Cialdini, and he's absolutely focused on it. Many, many behavioral sciences are focused on the ethical use. Brian Ahern gave us a great definition about how you can't just be in your own self-interest. It needs to be in the best interest of someone else.
Exactly.
As well, which I think is really cool. At the same time, there is still a subconscious act that is happening. There, if I go into the hotel room and the message on the shower stall says, by the way, 75% of the people that stayed in this room recycled their towels, that's going to have a bigger impact on me subconsciously than would you please recycle your towels.
Right. So moving on to our conversation with Jim.
Okay.
So this is really interesting because I think this is the part where the tools that we have today with nudges and with everything are super powerful, or they can be powerful. And to that point, we can use them ethically, and there are some people that maybe don't use them as ethically.
Absolutely, that's entirely possible.
The combination of behavioral science with data science,
yes,
lends itself into this whole nother realm of the ability to influence people's decisions, because we are now getting to the point where when we marry those two things together, we have such greater insight into what moves you or what moves me or what moves, Sally down the road, that we can customize those nudges such to the point where is there really a choice? Is it so persuasive that there isn't, so persuasive at a subconscious level that, yes, while we think we have the illusion of choice, do we actually have a choice? And that's where it gets really scary to me and interesting. And he brought up an interesting piece about where he's talking about the behavioral data that we have. We are now getting information on Facebook likes. We are getting your grocery store purchases. We are getting your wearable component. Your iPhone tracks how many stairs you do. You don't even know it, right? It's like looking at how many steps, how many this. All of that data can be compiled, cross-tabulated, looked at, and applied with the behavioral science lens to it. And, some smart people could really be at this point of saying, hey, we're gonna make people do X.
And that is happening. I'm sure that is happening, right? And some are doing it for good. I think about this new app using behavioral science to help people lose weight, Noom. And so they are very open and very intentional and very focused on using behavioral science nudges to engage people in behaviors that will lead them to lose weight.
Yes.
So again, great ethical applications, but it does beg the question: just because we can, should we?
Yeah.
And I also want to get back to what Jim said about behavioral science. Really is on the forefront today. Big data is huge, and we need to pay attention to that. And with bigger data, it's possible for us to make better decisions. But without a behavioral science lens, we're going to be missing out. The possibility exists that we're just going to look at the data and not take into consideration the actual behavioral implications of making decisions from this.
Yeah.
And that could lead us astray to make just erroneous choices.
Well, and the whole component about BIBO.
Bias in, bias out.
I love that component, right?
Good,
yes. I think is a really key piece. And if you do look at just the data, right? If you're just looking at the data, I think it's harder. I don't think it's impossible, and I don't think that data scientists are probably looking at this and saying, yes, we understand that biases in also can lead to biases out. But I think that behavioral science lens can help in identifying some of those biases as well.
Yeah.
Before we go too much further, I do want to. We talked a lot about bounded rationality. And so just for people who may not know what bounded rationality is, bounded rationality was a concept first developed by Herbert Simon back in, I think, the 1950s.
Yeah.
Carnegie Mellon. He was a Carnegie Mellon guy. But he was an economist, a psychologist who talked about bounded rationality from an economic perspective, where economists had said, wow, we make decisions in a rational way to maximize our utility and all this other stuff. And what he said is like, well, we do it in a bounded rational way because we're always limited by cognitive ability, the information that we have, the time that we have to make a decision, a variety of other factors. So it bounds, it kind of limits the amount of rationality that we can put into place, and which is a really insightful component. And actually is if you think about behavioral economics in its sense, it really is a forerunner of behavioral economics.
Absolutely.
Saying that, it's not predictably irrational. It's just saying that we're bounded in our rationality. And so we make decisions to satisfy usually as opposed to maximize, right? So is good enough. And so that's a really key piece of this whole conversation.
Absolutely. And the way that he ties it into these additional elements of bounded self-control and bounded self-interest. I thought that was really interesting that he brought those up.
Yeah. And so thinking about that and thinking about how we make our decisions and how do we make those components around, hey, my self-control is bounded as well. I would love to have full self-control.
But I don't.
But we don't, because we have things working on our subconscious level. We have time constraint. We have all of these other factors, right? You get that dopamine release when you see that candy bar that's in front of you. And yes, I know I shouldn't eat it, but wow, that's acting at a subconscious level on my wants and desires. And damn it.
I instantly start rationalizing, well, I did have an apple this morning, and I'm probably going to have a salad for dinner tonight, so I'll probably be good.
Yeah. So all of those factors come into play as we think about why we do what we do, right? And that piece I thought was really interesting from Jim's conversation.
Absolutely. Can I ask you a music question now?
Of course, because you will, regardless if I say yes or no.
Well, so I've been reading Rockonomics right now, a really wonderful book, and I'll link it in the show notes. But there's a couple of things that were pointed out by the author that really struck me. One is that the percentage of the population that identifies themselves as being involved in music, like completely professionally full time, or sort of the I've got a day job kind of a musician, is about the same today or 2017 as it was in 1977.
Okay.
So about the same percentage of people say that, but the distribution of revenues went from, like, in 1977, 80% of the revenue within the entire music community went to about the top 30% of performers.
Okay.
Today, 80% of the revenues go to about 1/10 of all the performers.
So the Beyoncés, the Kanyes, the
Drake, yeah, they own it. Taylor Swift, they own the business. And so what I'm curious about is, with all this, but there's also more music available, right? What did they say? Spotify, you could listen to if you listen to every song, that it would take you 64 lifetimes or something to get through it all.
Okay.
So it's insane. With this concentration of wealth, do you listen to more artists today than you did, let's just say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Or fewer artists today? Is your listening more concentrated today, or is it broader today?
Good question. With just a quick reflection back in my head of remembering what I listened to 20 years ago, which is faulty, as we know, as most memories are, and mine may be more faulty than most.
Get in line.
But I would say I listen to a wider variety because of the ease of access. Mm-hmm. Because I am not going out and having to purchase a CD or an album of all of these people and paying $10 to $20 for that, not knowing who it is or what it is, and I can just stream that and go, oh, that looks interesting. Let me test that. Mm-hmm. And I like it or I don't like it. I think that lends itself to a larger experimentation of different musical genres and styles and various different pieces. That being said, I find myself coming back into my ones that I tend to like,
and we
right?
have those.
I mean,
yes, of course.
My
Your
Flora
favorites.
Cash, my Julia and Angus Stone,
exactly.
all of those that I'm looking at my playlist. If I was to look at it, and I go, well, which do I listen to every night? Well, I listen to these 3,
Yeah.
And I don't really get out now. Granted, within there's some variety, but still, it's a mixed bag.
So you're testing more music, but because you're not buying it, because we almost never buy music anymore. I mean, very few people buy music these days. You're not committing to it, and you're not committing to the possibility of what might happen. When it was an LP, you heard one song and you went and you bought the LP and you discovered through listening to the vinyl, 8 other songs that were like, wow, that's so cool. There was a sense of discovery and challenge that went with that.
Well, and I think music also has this component that the first time you hear something, some music you just immediately gravitate to.
Yeah.
Some music,
in part because it's just sugar and it's just that instant dopamine hit. You just can't not like it.
but some music requires multiple listenings too.
Right.
to do that, which I had this conversation with my son last night. We were talking, he was talking his music, and we were at a restaurant, and the restaurant was playing great 80s music that I just was like, say, this is the best music ever.
Def Leppard, like, Metallica.
No. It was not that. It was anyway. It was
good music.
It was The Cure. It was Echo and the Bunnymen. It was some the new age, new wave music that I listened to. Okay. Anyway, but it also had some Irish kind of rock and various different things from the 80s and
AOR and
I don't know who exactly it was.
O'Connor and
no, it was more of the anyway.
All right.
Long story short, my son Quinn said, I can't tell that it was the Irish rock apart. Right? I can't tell one from the other.
Right.
And I go, I get that. It's kind of like me and your rap music, You put one song and then you play another song, and I couldn't tell you if it was different or not. And so, but we both realized, we said, well, it takes multiple listenings too. And then you can start to discern those differences within that. And I think that is a really case of having that LP where you listen to that. Hey, it's the single, but then
what's the second track?
There's friction of going over to the LP and picking up the needle and pulling it off and getting a whole different, and to put a whole nother record on. Oh man, you just listen through to the end, and all of a sudden
listen the whole
that
side,
second song, wow, that's actually pretty good, and that fourth or fifth song. All right, after a few listenings, you get that. So
yeah, interesting. So I don't know. I find it interesting. Well, when looking at the industry, the music industry from an economic perspective, it's changed dramatically, and I'm just wondering how it influences whether or not that's reflected in your listening habits.
Yeah, I think, again, to that point, I think I am more experimental. I don't know if I get as deep into some of those experimentals. And the other sad thing about the component of today is that I will know songs, but I don't necessarily, I will recognize a song, but I don't necessarily recognize who that artist is because I'm not looking at the phone to actually see who is playing on that playlist, right? So I'm listening to an Angus and Julia, playlist on my phone, and another song comes in, and I like it, I know it, I recognize it, but I haven't purchased the album. I'm not listening to the radio where they go, and that's Bon Jovi with a new whatever.
But did you used to? Is that different from your behavior in years past?
Well, but I think it.
Or is it the environment?
In years past, it was on the radio where they would come in and they would say who that is, right? Mm-hmm. Or you would be at a concert and somebody, the opening band or whatever it would be. I don't know how again, how did we find different music back before we could just, stream something and they would play something else and you go, oh, that's good. Or, you just do something.
Social influence was a much more, well, I shouldn't say it's much more, but it certainly had a powerful impact when you weren't listening to as much, when you didn't have access to as much music in the mainstream as we have now. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Thanks. Thanks.
No, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
And thank you, listeners. We appreciate you listening in.
We always do.
And listen to us next week.